Viktor Alexeyevich, judging by the name of the program, you're not inclined to blame Osama bin Laden for what happened on September the 11th, 2001 in the USA.
Yes, I have every reason to believe that the search for bin Laden is a well-staged performance, designed for a very primitive viewer, who, being deprived of willpower, gazes at the TV. Bin Laden today is safely sheltered by those who, after the event, began to search for a black cat in a black room. This is how the system of supranational governance excludes disruptions in the fulfillment of the mission of the World Gender Army by the United States, kindling the flames of war throughout the world. To begin with, bin Laden himself is a figure completely controlled by the CIA. His personal annual budget in the CIA system was $250 million a year for Operation Cyclone, which the United States conducted in Afghanistan while our troops were there. These data are not secret. All the details were stated, in particular in Nezavisimaya Gazeta, Russian independent newspaper. Bin Laden's budget and Bush Jr.'s oil business in Texas are known to have the same financial roots. Bin Laden's sister lives in Switzerland, his brother lives in the USA, who is a sponsor of Harvard University, and bin Laden himself has a central office in the city of London. His account was successfully operating after September the 11th.
What do you mean by a system of supranational governance? And what is the benefit for this governance if, under the pretext of looking for a black cat, hostilities begin in the countries designated as terroristic?
It is impossible to talk casually about the system of supranational governance or conceptual power. The whole cycle of our programs will shape our concept of it. Those interested, I can refer to my book, Conceptual Power, Myth or Reality, simple on the systemic mechanisms of plunder of Russia. In the meantime, we note that conceptual power is the highest hierarchical level of power in the system of social governance. From its level, the entire mechanism of supposedly opposing parties and movements is formed. From its level, structuralist governance is carried out in relation to legislative, executive, and judicial powers. At the same time, every person within the boundaries of the measure of his understanding works for himself, but within the boundaries of the measure of his non-understanding he works for those who know and understand more. Conceptual power is understood as the power of global ideas, sometimes unkind, undobrious, criminal ideas, as criminal as the power of those people who have meaningfully comprehended these ideas and implement them in life. Now, in relation to the countries of the Euro-American conglomerate, in relation to our country, an inter-regional center of biblical conceptual power with its headquarters in Switzerland functions. This is a specific flight control center for every one of the controlled, governed countries. There, not at the level of presidents, decisions are made on which country should follow the course of prosperity and which one the course of collapse, which country should be the place of the world sanatorium and which one should be the global garbage dump and a pan-European Gazprom oil supplying country. This does not imply any conspiracies in world governments. This implies real schemes of structuralist governance, and if the leader of the country is not initiated into the system or has not comprehended it himself, then the country becomes a hostage of the pseudo-Zretzes who have comprehended and built the system. One can resist them only if one truly comprehended the system of social governance on the basis of the development of world understanding. This is what our program serves. Conceptual power contains 6 generalized priorities of governance, but they work only together as a single mechanism. As for military, weapons, and terror, they are the last and 6th priority. A country that builds its future on the 6th priority is doomed. It does not have stable results. This was the case with Nazi Germany, and this is the case with the United States, which is going down in its actions to the 6th priority. Switzerland, which works on higher priorities, weapons of genocide, tobacco, alcohol, drugs, world money, ideological, chronological, and methodological weapons, has never made hot war and does not plan to do so in the future. I would not like to deviate from our main topic, and will end this digression with a single comparison. The pharaohs of ancient Egypt were analogous to the current presidents, or P-residents, and the conceptual power that governed over the pharaohs and indirectly appointed them was represented by the ancient Egyptian Zretzhud. It has survived to this day, having been reborn into pseudo-Zretzhud which is raping humanity in its own interests.
It seems to me that this deviation is very important for understanding all the problems. But by whom and for what purpose were the explosions in the United States organized? Who benefits from it?
You made a very important clarification. Indeed, nothing happens in the world just for no reason. Behind any event, there is always someone who benefits. So, through the explosions in the United States, the interests of the masters of the dollar pyramid are realized. The tasks of strengthening the shaken dollar are being solved.
You apparently meant to say not of strengthening but of undermining the dollar.
No, I did not make a mistake. It seemed to many in the world that it was an action against the dollar, but this is not the case if you analyze the entire scenario. Undermining the dollar is a short-term stage. In our country, this tendency worked for no more than 2 days. But the strengthening of the dollar is the next stage, and the strategic goal of the terrorist operation. That is why the book that our collective has published on this subject is called The Last Gambit. Through the characters of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, it reveals the essence of what happened in the USA. You probably know about gambits in chess, when a pawn is sacrificed at the first stage, and at the second stage, if the opponent has bought this setup, a much more significant piece of his is taken. So Hitler, to justify his steps, organized the arson of the Reichstag and then the attack on the German border garrison. He did it with the help of his own soldiers dressed in Polish uniforms. So, through these provocations, he paved the way for his atrocities and the outbreak of hostilities, war. The judicial farce over Dimitrov in Germany and over Slobodan Milosevic now, the Olympic Games in Germany in 1936, just like in the USA, demonstrate to the world the power of the appointed gendarmeries. All these are not historical parallels, but signs of the same algorithm. The imagination of the developer is limited. Any more or less sane-minded person has no doubts that all these simultaneous hijackings of the planes, their unimpeded movement outside the designated air routes, in principle are not possible without cover, direct or indirect, by the US Special Services. It is no coincidence that the newspaper Izvestia, issue of December 21st, 2001, giving a prognosis for 2002 on the first page, claims that the names of the FBI agents involved in organizing the terrorist attacks in the United States will be announced. The most convincing arguments about the participation of the CIA in organizing the terrorist acts were made by a professional in these matters, former Minister of Defense of the Federal Republic of Germany, Andreas van Bülow, in the magazine Tagesspiegel. He claims that the CIA is in fact not subordinate to the state authorities, therefore it works for the system of supranational governance. We are not talking about the nraviousness of the CIA agents themselves. Every one of them did his own job, not knowing the plan of the operation as a whole and its consequences. I will not give you all the countless arguments for the fact that this operation cannot be carried out from the outside. I will only note that according to experts, aiming the aircraft at the towers of the World Trade Center cannot be done manually. This happened in the autopilot mode with guidance by radio beacons. The highest financial world, as it is known, knew about the upcoming operation in advance and was intensively dumping the shares of all the companies involved in the upcoming nightmare. Could the special services, which have their agents primarily in the financial world, not know about this? Only uninitiated clerks came to work that day, and the number of victims was incomparably low in comparison to the number of workers in these buildings. Allegedly, not a trace remained of the black boxes, but the passport of the hijacking pilot in this hell was found. All these fairy tales are too cheap and primitive.
So, we have approached, I think, the main question of our conversation. Who benefits from this? And how is the benefit from the terrorist attacks realized?
This is not beneficial to the United States or the American people. In the same way, the processes of insane financial investments in Hitler by the global financial clans of Europe and the US were not beneficial to the German people. Note that back in 1935, Hitler did not have a single cannon, not a single tank, not a single aircraft. Without comprehending the mechanisms of the financial promotion of the German military machine, we won't understand the objective of the promotion of the US military machine, the organization in the USA of governance with the elimination of common sense and democratic freedoms. This year's military budget for the United States is the budget for large-scale warfare. So why was Hitler organized and financed? And after the completion of the operation, according to the information I have, he was taken to Latin America, where he peacefully and carefreely lived out his days. The fact is that after World War I, the foundations of the previously dominant British pound sterling were shaken, and a struggle between currencies for leadership began, which went on with varying success. The global supranational financial clans that owned the dollar issuance through the Federal Reserve System, having organized the war on the territory of Europe, thereby lowered the currencies of all the warring powers. Let us emphasize that the US Federal Reserve, as well as our central bank, are de facto private corporations, and the question of nationalizing the central bank raised by the President of Russia has been skillfully hushed up for 1.5 years already. In 1944, the objective of war was achieved. The Bretton Woods Agreement was concluded, according to which the US dollar was recognized as the only world currency exchangeable for gold. The American historian Wolff outlined the advantages of the third party quite accurately. He said that the best way to use the advantages of war is to always have a war, especially if it turns out to be possible to do so with minimal participation in hostilities. According to the results of World War II, the masters of the dollar system received the right to unlimited emission of dollar paper with a very cunning income, which in the Economic Encyclopedia is called by the rarely used word seigniorage. Seigniorage is the difference between the value of money and the cost to produce and distribute it. That is, if the cost of producing a $100 bill is 10 cents, then the profit of the one who prints it is $99.90 for one piece of $100 paper. In our country, the central bank has very high profits from the emission of the ruble, and then spends them uncontrollably. The uncontrolled printing of the dollar paper outnumbered the available gold reserves, and in 1971, President Nixon, having issued an order, unilaterally cancelled the exchange of dollars for gold. This was the default of the US. For the first time in history, for 30 years already, mankind, by inertia, due to formed habits, perceives this or that de jure, backed-by-nothing paper in the quality of money. The reliability of the paper is a non-economic category based on advertising and PR actions of this paper. The country that prints this piece of paper gets, in exchange, everything it desires: gold, oil, timber, gas, etc. The corporation, which is the issuer of this paper, has a profitability that neither drug dealers nor arms dealers have ever dreamed of.
What is the reason for the fact that the last 20 years have been marked by a sharp intensification of terrorism, although the whole generation has already lived without a large-scale war?
The aforementioned sheds light on the origins and essence of terrorism. Wars have always been waged to redistribute markets. Any military conflict between two opponents is organized and provoked by a third party, which solves the task aimed at creating sales markets on the territory destroyed by the war, also the task aimed at getting access to raw materials, technologies, and cheap labor. Can you imagine the volume of orders that the Western companies will receive in Yugoslavia? Factories, bridges, roads, etc. In the new market, the market of paper money, there is no need for the systematic destruction of the infrastructure of the territory. Terrorist acts with their subsequent widespread advertising on television are quite sufficient. The region becomes less attractive for investments. As a result, the currency of the warring region is replaced by the currency of a non-warring country. Such maneuvers undermine the foundations of the ruble in Russia through Chechnya, the foundations of the euro in Europe through Yugoslavia, and now Afghanistan has announced the import of $6 billion at the first stage. Such is the nature of the purpose-orientedly created conflicts from Yugoslavia to Indonesia. All of them took place as operations to further expand the sales market for the so-called product, dollar bills. The only way to stabilize the situation in the world, including in Chechnya, without changing the nature of money, is to ban the demonstration of acts of terror in the mass media. The absence of television advertisements will make acts of terror meaningless to those who organize and finance them.
Is there a radical means of stopping terrorism that has developed over the past 20 years?
Yes, there is. Its financial methodological basis can be eliminated by transferring the world financial credit system to a fundamentally different conception of functioning. Humanity must go back to the commodity form of money and introduce an energy standard of currencies. We Russians must switch to exporting our untold treasures, gas, timber, oil, metals, etc., exclusively for rubles. And then the ruble will be the most reliable and stable currency in the world, because our exports exceed the volume of imports by 2 times. Now, giving 95% of exports for dollars, we provide the demand for the dollar and its strengthening. Dollars are needed and are in demand, since we give Russia's resources for this paper. When the West was colonizing others, they first gave the Aborigines glass necklaces. We have nothing but dollar paper. We buy it like outright idiots. Japan, back in 1948, introduced a law prohibiting exports not for the yen. In 1999, I wrote an article in the Russian newspaper Rush Hour, which was also included in the book Only World War Can Save the Dollar. The war was unleashed in many regions of the world except the USA itself. On the basis of this scenario, the masters of the dollar pyramid want to save the dollar. To unleash a war, they organized the provocation with explosions on the principle of the arson of the Reichstag by Hitler, which untied the hands of the US military machine. At this stage, the Gambit was a success. For 2 pawns in the center of New York, the US obtained 2 military bases in Kyrgyzia and Uzbekistan, a strong point in Georgia in order to have direct contact not only with Russia, but also with the strategic opponent of the US, China. Put yourself in the position of these pseudo-Zhrezes and come up with a different way of direct invasion into the underbelly of Russia and China. You will fail to work out another way. Through our program, we would like to warn the US leadership. A global provocation has been prepared against you and your people. Do not fall into the scheme of Bulgakov's Berlioz. Do not step into spilled oil. Remember A.S. Pushkin, who, having access to the system of knowledge of the Holy Russian Zhrezhud, warned with mockery those who rely on military force. You whose swords clash in contest gory, persist in your dread rivalry, pay tribute full to somber glory, and relish hate and enmity. Let the world, gaping at your deadly encounters, freeze none will try. To interfere more none will sadly, of pity for you breathe a sigh.
Are the military events in Nagorno-Karabakh, Chechnya, Yugoslavia, Iraq following the same scenario?
Yes, the scenario of the biblical conception is as old as the world. Divide and conquer. The only right position on the Balkans was taken by the Russian Tsar Alexander III. For everything that happens in the Balkans, I will not give the life of even one Russian soldier. Milosevic, Saddam Hussein, and other pseudo-patriots are agents of those who are bombing their own peoples. These schemes became so obvious that even the Russian magazine Vlast, Power, wrote about the collusion between Milosevic and Madeleine Albright. The current judicial farce is connected with the fact that this scheme was roughly implemented, so it had to be additionally covered up. It does not matter whether these pseudo-patriots are directly recruited or governed bypassing consciousness, but without their help it would be impossible to always have a war. They always give an accurate pass to the aggressor at the right time. Either by some punitive operation or by another military step, they provide the illusion of justifying the start of hostilities. In the absence of a purposefully created horror story in the form of Saddam Hussein, would it be possible to continuously bomb Iraq, thereby ensuring knockdown prices for oil pumped out of this region?
Viktor Alexeyevich, I would like to thank you for the conversation. You did highlight the problems of using military weapons from fundamentally new and nevertheless quite logical standpoints. Our next meeting will be devoted, as I understand it, to a more formidable weapon, the weapon of genocide.